hello, welcome to the video. This one's about London's important music venues that everybody seems to have forgotten about. This isn't about pub venues, although one or two are pubs. And the first one we're going to talk about is the Rock Garden. The Rock Garden was primarily a hamburger restaurant, actually, in the piazza at Covent Garden. The basement of the Rock Garden hamburger joint opened in 1976, and that's where the music was. I was not really a Rock Garden kind of guy, to be perfectly honest with you. I was involved a little bit in the Covent Garden sort of catering world because I used to work for a guy called Brian Stein who opened the Roadhouse, which was further over, a bigger venue. Don't forget, back in the 1970s, Covent Garden was actually a fruit and veg market, and it was a very down market, very seedy, and that's why all these clubs and these places sort of got there. Covent Garden back then was in the middle of town, but property was quite cheap. There were a lot of fruit and veg warehouses and that sort of thing, and when the market moved out, those places were turned into restaurants and shops and things like that. There's a guy called Arthur, I think Arthur Worsley, was it? Or was that the Duke of Wellington? Anyway, the guy called Arthur that owned it, but the guy that I dealt with, who I had things to do with, was a guy called Sean McDonnell, because he was the guy who seemed to be the manager of the venue and booked the bands and things, because I booked the bands at various places around town, and he and I sort of like got on well, and we had drinks and lunch occasionally and things like that, and the Rock Garden became one of the iconic places, mainly because they put on everybody and anybody. If you look in the lists of where the famous bands played first, it's quite often the Rock Garden. There are quite a few venues claim that U2 played there first, and Rock Garden's one of those, although I believe it was the Half Moon at Putney. Maybe wrong about that, but I think they played there because of the Irish connection first. A lot of people did the ticket deal, which I've explained in other videos, where basically bands pay a deposit, shall we say, and get a load of tickets back, which they then sell to their friends and can make a huge profit in theory. But of course, if you're doing loads of gigs, it's not a very satisfactory way to fulfill a venue, actually, I found, so I didn't really go along with this. But the Rock Garden put on loads of good things. I had this VIP card, actually, back in, was it the 90s? Which was basically one of the most iconic VIP card I've ever had, because it was solid metal. It was about that big. It was like a credit card size, and so it was quite a weight in my credit card holder. It was a basement. That the stage was quite small. It was in a corner. It was, I suppose you probably get 200 in there, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. I'm not great at estimating these things because a lot of it's to do with how many entrances you've got and that sort of thing. It's to do with fire regs and that sort of thing. What reference there is online says that the gardening club took it over. Now, I know that isn't true because the gardening club opened next door. It may have taken over eventually, but as far as I'm concerned, music in this time, from the 70s to the 90s, was fast moving. There were things happening. There were bands coming down to London. There were bands being created. There were bands flying in from all over the world. And it was a really exciting time. And the Rock Garden and the gardening club was part of that. And eventually, what happened was Covent Garden got too expensive for anybody to put on live music. I believe the Roadhouse has gone, and the Rock Garden went, I think, 2008, and it's now the Apple flagship store in Covent Garden. The basement is basically where the Rock Garden and the gardening club were, and the ground floor is where the hamburger restaurant was. So that's the Rock Garden. Goodbye, Rock Garden. And who's next then? Well, the next one is the railway at West Hampstead. This is in West End Lane, West Hampstead in northwest London. Well, quite central northwest London, quite bijou, quite posh even then. And this was a pub, a big old Victorian pub, which was right next door to the Decca Studios, where the Beatles did their set and got turned down by Decca Records. But after that, there were a lot of people recording in there and doing stuff in there. So they used to go into the next door pub, which is called the Railway at West Hampstead. And upstairs on the first floor was an old ballroom. You used to see these quite a lot back in those, well, back in the day. In Putney, for example, both the White Lion and the Star and Garter, which are like the two nearest pubs to the river, one by the bridge, one a bit further up, they had first floor ballrooms, and they had sprung down floors, and they were rather nicely laid out. This is what happened at the Railway at West Hampstead. And in 1961, a guy called Dick Jordan opened, well, in January 1961, opened upstairs at Railway at West Hampstead, and he called it Klooks Kleek. Now, the origin of that name is a bit weird because there was an album, a jazz album by a drummer called Kenny Clark, who had the nickname Klook, and The album was called Klooks, Kleek. Now it's Kleek in the French, like it meaning a group of people, Clique, whereas the venue was called Klooks, Kleek, Kleek. Don't ask me why, I have no idea, because it was jazz, and as we know, I'm not particularly a jazz person, so for the first few years it was jazz, and then eventually they had homegrown British blues artists like John Mayall's Blues Breakers and Steam Packet featuring Long John Baldwin and various other people, and Cream famously recorded their first live album there in 1966, and so it was quite a big place. By the time it closed, I think in 1970, Led Zeppelin had played there and people like that, and it was like one of the big places on the scene. Then it became something else whose name I can't remember, and then see, all these dates are very hazy because Wikipedia has a lot of erroneous information on it about these sort of things and very vague information, but for what I can gather, it was 1977 when the Moonlight Club opened. Well, this is another one because it was obviously punk and the new wave thing was kicking off, and the Moonlight Club became one of the big, I suppose you call it, one of the big places where bands, especially bands from Manchester, could like Joy Division play there for 3 nights, and I believe, did the Smiths play there for the first London gig? It was either there or the Rock Garden. Even though it was halfway across the world from my universe down in Fulham and Putney to start with, and then South East London a bit later on, I went to the Moonlight occasionally. It wasn't the easiest place to get to for me, but it was always worth the trip. Quite a lot of the time when it was the Moonlight Club, there wasn't really a proper stage. I think the Moonlight Club started off with a stage made out of boxes, and I think eventually they built a stage and moved things around and made it a bit more professional, shall we say, because it was attracting quite big acts. I mean, Talking Heads played there, as they did at the Rock Garden. You see, I'm talking about the Rock Garden, even though I've stopped talking about the Rock Garden. But anyway, don't forget, if you like this, please like. If you're not already subscribe, that really helps, and share it with your friends, and comment, let me know what you think. So tell me to slow down, tell me I'm going too fast, which I probably am, and I do apologise for that, but I'm trying to get it all in, all these facts, all this information into a short video that people might want to watch. And who's next then? Actually, no, we haven't finished the railway, have I? No. I think the Moonlight Club was run by a guy called Dave Kitson. This may all be wrong, I may be making it all up, but that's what I believed. Then it became the Starlight Club, I'm not sure why, and then eventually it petered out. Pretty sure it's now flats. Why would you want to turn a lovely ballroom into flats is beyond me. But that seems to be what's happened all over London. I think the only one I know that's still there for sure is the one at the Star and Garter, because they use it for weddings and things like that. So, and it's very nice. If you get a chance to have a look, if you're in Putney by the river, go and have a look. And the next one we're going to talk about is the Mean Fiddler. Now, the Mean Fiddler, I have a personal connection to this slightly, because when Vince Powell was starting up the Mean Fiddler, he used to come down to the Cricketers and we used to chat. He always insisted on paying to get in, which I thought was quite, I don't know, it was a good thing to do, because he used to then go and talk to the bands and things, and if I'd let him in for free, I might be a bit peevish about him stealing all my acts. Not that I don't think that the Harlesden, because the Mean Fiddler was in Harlesden, which is an area of London that no one really went to. It had a very bad name, Harlesden. I think there was a bit of a turf war between the Irish gangs and the Jamaican origin gangs, and so I'd never really cared about things like that, because I used to pop into Brixton during the riots. People let's not talk about the Brixton riots, especially when we're talking about the Mean Fiddler at Harlesden. So, the Mean Fiddler, back in the early 1980s when I was at the Cricketers, by the Oval Cricket Ground, Kennington Oval, putting on the bands there. Because we had quite a good range of acts, Vince Power, who opened the Mean Fiddler in Harlesden, used to be a boxing gym, I believe, and he turned it into a very good club, and it was the headquarters for a long time of the Mean Fiddler group. They had offices upstairs, and very nice they were too, because I went there a few times to see Vince. But this is going back to when Vince was just like, I think at the time he was operated second-hand shops. He was the king of the second-hand shops, and he told me that he'd found a painting that's, I think he used to do house clearances, and he got a painting, and it turned out to be quite valuable, and he sold it at auction, and he got enough money out of that to start the Mean Fiddler. Originally, because he was into country and western, believe it or not, it was going to be a country and western club. As he came to see me at the Cricketers in the mid-80s, I presume the Mean Fiddler would have already been open then, because it opened as a country and a western club, and it slowly developed into one of the premier venues in the whole of London. Basically, Vince was a bit like me in a certain extent. He used to operate in the principle that if you wanted an act, he used to just go for that act. If the band wanted too much money, very often Vince would pay them, and then he would pass on the cost. For example, he used to, towards the end of his life, because unfortunately Vince passed away almost exactly a year ago as I'm recording this in March 2025, and towards the end, when he was just doing the Dingwalls and the Orange, which was a venue in West Kensington, which he renamed, Nell's he called it, he basically used to put on Van Morrison there. Now, this is the thing about Vince Power. I was a bit like this, but he was the master of this. He was like, he didn't care. If he wanted to put on Van Morrison, he basically used to think, right, Van Morrison's, let's say, wants £10,000. I think it might have been a little bit more, but let's say Van Morrison wants £10,000. If he can get in 300 people to Nell's, and he knows he's going to sell all the e-tickets, because that's the thing, and he just divides the fee by 300 people, and he's going to take the bar, because he knows a full house, it means he's going to make money on the bar, especially if it's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday. And that was the way he used to work. He influenced me, because I put on originally Chuck Berry at the 100 Club, which I've mentioned a few times, charging £150, Easter Sunday 2008. And on the face of it, that is absolutely crazy, because when you used to go and see Chuck Berry in those days, he used to play somewhere like the Hackney Empire or somewhere like that, or maybe the Jazz Cafe or whatever, and they'd be charging £25 maximum. Right, so who in their right minds would pay 150 quid to see Chuck Berry? Well, I would, because I want to be close up in a small club. We can get these artists sweat on you, this is the thing. And it's like much more intimate, and I put on 9 Below, Zero as a sport, and I made it as worthwhile as I could, and we had Mark Lamar as the DJ, and it was a great night. I mean, obviously you have to be fairly, not wealthy, but you've got to be fairly interested in Chuck Berry to pay £150 for like an evening's entertainment, even especially back then. People were, and that was the Vince Power way he used to do things. So it meant he used to get at the Mean Fiddler at Harlesden the best acts. I mean, he had Roy Orbison played the last time he ever played there, and he had people who shouldn't be playing there. He used to pay them more and charge a little bit more, or maybe subsidise it from the bar. He opened a restaurant there, he opened the acoustic room there. He just put in things, just improved it. And I know he always struggled in Harlesden. Venues in the centre of town, like the 100 Club and the Borderline and Ronnie Scott's and places like that, traditionally do well, because it's all the transport for London is geared towards getting people into the centre and out again for work. And he eventually formed an empire, as we know. I always got on very well with Vince. He was a very good man. There were stories about him, but I never had a problem with him. I always had a positive experience. He helped me out more than once, and he was a very good man and a very loyal man. And I salute Vince Power. The Electric Ballroom at Camden Town is, for me, one of the best venues I've ever put on at shows at. I didn't do many shows there, but when I did, it was always a great place. It was opened in the 1930s as an Irish dance hall. In 1978, when I can't remember which call it's called, something like the Deity or something like that. But when it was renamed the Electric Ballroom, it was to capitalise on the way that the Music Machine and Dingwalls and all these places, just straight after the punk thing, and Bill Fuller, who was the guy who did it, he basically was an Irish millionaire sort of guy. I think he was a builder. And he basically made it the Electric Ballroom. It was a roller disco, I can remember. And also as well, he used to put on the odd gig here and there. But in 1990, he started to put in a market there, because obviously Camden Town at the weekends is absolutely heaving. So the market was a major part of it all. And so that meant you couldn't put on shows when I was doing it on Saturday nights, but used to run a club night. The venue used to run its own club night on Fridays and Saturdays. I put on Wilko Johnson there, I put on various things. I can't remember, I put on the Boomtown Rats there when they reformed, and Bob Geldolf, who wasn't involved in the reformed Boomtown Rats, came and watched them. He stood in the middle of the room with his son, I think, and he was quite roughly dressed as he was in those days, and he just stood there sneering all night. So there you go. That was fun. I think he's since rejoined the version that's out now. And that was it. The Electric Ballroom was a good place. I mean, Prince famously played there. It's a really long story, but I was actually there, but I don't remember it. Because what happened was, Prince played, I think, when he was in his phase when he was known as a symbol. And he'd play, I think, every Thursday for like a month or something. And I was working at Time Out at the time, and we obviously got word of this. And we got invited. And I went once, and he didn't play for some reason. Or if he did play, he wasn't playing on the stage. He was behind a screen, I seem to remember. Because I tell you what, in those days, when we used to go out to shows, we used to get we used to go to the bar first, put it that way. There were things happening maybe in my head which meant that I missed it. And then I know I went again, and apparently he did play, but I do not remember it. It was a real shame, because Prince was one of the most iconic acts of all time, even when he was just known as a symbol. But the Electric Ballroom's had so many great acts there. It's got this, I don't know, there's a unique atmosphere there. I can't really put it into words. I always found the staff were very helpful. Because it used to be a bit rough and ready, actually. It used to be exactly as you would think an Irish ballroom would be that was built in the 1930s. They were like balconies, there were bars upstairs, there were bars downstairs. The stage was quite big, quite high up, and it was really good. So there you go, Electric Ballroom. If you get a chance to go to the Electric Ballroom, soak in the atmosphere. If you do a search online for the Vortex Club, Wardour Street, you won't find anything hardly online. Because what it was in 1977, a guy called Dave Woods, who ran City Entertainment, I think it was called. I think he was the manager of Siouxsie and the Banshees eventually. But when he started it, he was a guy who used to put on gigs, much like me. And it was in 1977, he found there was a venue called, because in those days, there were a lot of nightclubs around, and during the early part of the week, they wouldn't have anybody in there particularly, so they would rent them out. So people who ran punk clubs often did that. I worked at a place around this time called Fangs, which was the discotheque underneath Paddington Station, the station hotel there. Andrew Siouxsie, who founded the famous Roxy Punk Club in London's Covent Garden, he put on shows there, and I can remember he had Wayne County and the Electric Chairs. Was it Electric Chairs? Or was it something else? And he had people like that. And the manager of Fangs didn't like all this. But anyway, Crackers, Dave Woods in 1977 on Monday, Tuesday nights put on these. There were loads of bands on each night, 4 bands, sometimes 3, generally 4. So some of the bands were pretty awful, some of the bands were fantastic. Nobody played particularly long, because in those days, the punk bands, it was part of their thing that they only did a few songs. So you'd see the Lurkers, Siouxsie and the Banshees, and then there were people that you wouldn't have heard of particularly. These are bands that maybe this is their only gig they've ever played. The music was so exciting, it was new, it was taking everything that we'd come to look at, like Genesis and all that prog rock stuff, and it really kicked it up the whatsits. And it was very exciting. The Vortex at Crackers didn't last long. I can't find any references to it apart from in the year 1977, so I presume it was just like a few weeks or maybe months. I think months, because I went there probably 12 or 15 times. It wasn't expensive to get in. I don't think anybody got paid particularly much, but it was like a good way to go. I think it was open late, so what more could you possibly want? Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what I do, and I hope to see you next time. By the way, if you want to watch something else by me, and I suggest you do, that'd be very good of you, here's something I would recommend next. Cheers, see you next time, bye.